Causes of Evolution Part 2. The first part dealt with natural selection, which is one way that evolution occurs. However, it is not the only way. So this video will discuss two alternative ways that evolution can occur in a population. The key concepts to focus on in this video is what are the other two mechanisms of evolution, genetic drift and gene flow, what is the definition of genetic drift and the types of genetic drift, what's the result of it, and same thing with gene flow. What is gene flow and what is the result of gene flow? Natural selection was the idea that if you're better adapted to your environment, you're going to pass your alleles off to your offspring, and over time you're going to see that your genes become more common in the population. However, let's say you're talking about a small population. So instead of talking about the giraffe population, you're talking about a very small, isolated population on an island. Well, natural selection is not random. It's due to your environment, it's due to competition. However, if you have a small population, random events can greatly influence the frequency of alleles in your population. So genetic drift is this idea. Genetic drift is the idea that random events change the frequency and cause evolution in a small population. So an example of that is, let's say you have 5 red beads and 1 yellow bead. Over time you could see that the yellow beads might reproduce and become more common. However, if I kill the yellow bead randomly, there's some random event that it drops dead, well, now I only have red beads left in my population. We'll do a simulation with this later in the week. So the key concept with genetic drift, it is a random change in the allele frequency, and the result of that is that you always lose variation. Genetic drift is bad. Genetic drift is when a small population is randomly affected and you lose variation. You lose the ability to actually adapt and survive. The two types of genetic drift you're responsible for knowing are known as the founder effect and the bottleneck effect, which we'll go over right now. The founder effect is the idea that a small group of a population actually go off on their own and inhabit a new area and populate a new area. So it's when a small bunch breaks off from the larger population. So the issue is that some rare alleles might become higher than they should be, and some that should be present are now missing. So you can see an example of that in the bottom here. You see that you have a population with red and blue individuals, about 50-50. However, let's say I just take a small handful of that out and I use that to settle a new island. You notice I could take a handful that is 100% red, in which case I just lost the blue gene, never to be seen again on this island. Now imagine if that was a gene for cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia. Now I see genetic disorders much more common than I should. Or you can see another example where I took a handful, I end up randomly with all blue. Or maybe I take a handful, I end up with about half and half blue and red. You can see that it's random though. So the founder effect is a random, it is genetic drift, and it causes certain alleles to be overrepresented and it causes certain alleles to be underrepresented, which can have massive impacts when you're talking about genetic disorders or even natural selection. If you lose that variation, the population will not be able to adapt to future changes in the environment. And it skews the gene pool. The second type of genetic drift is known as the bottleneck effect. You can imagine it is just like you have a bottle with the original population. Some random event happens, some natural disaster, famine, loss of habitat, and you lose most of your population. So you can see as the example, you have a bottle filled with yellow, white, and blue beads. Some event happens, kills off most of your population. It's known as the bottlenecking event. And you see in the cup is your now new surviving population that is able to reproduce. Notice instead of having, you have now no yellow, so that yellow gene is now gone from your population, probably never to be seen again, and you have mostly blue. So that trait is now going to become more prevalent. So it narrows the gene pool. Once again, genetic drift, a random event that you're losing variation. The same thing is happening with the northern elephant seal in California. You can see a population size graph on the bottom right here, how it was pretty stable. Then we started hunting them, and we almost put them to extinction. So we lost a lot of the variation, and now they're slowly recovering, but there's still not many in the wild anymore. So that's the idea. So humans also can be the bottlenecking event. So genetic drift is a random change in the allele frequency of a population, 100% random, and the key thing is that it reduces variation. You lose differences in your population due to genetic drift, which is the founder effect and the bottleneck effect. The third way that evolution can occur, we had natural selection, which is non-random. We had genetic drift, which is random. And we also now have gene flow, which is also random. So gene flow is literally what it sounds like, the flow of genes. It's the movement of individuals between populations. So you gain and lose alleles over time. The key thing about gene flow is if everyone can travel and everyone can have sex and mate with other individuals all around the world, you're reducing the differences between populations. So gene flow, the result of gene flow, is a reduction in differences. Think of the human population. When we were isolated, we had variation. We had darker-skinned individuals in certain areas of the world. We had lighter-skinned individuals in certain areas of the world. But now that we can travel around the world and make babies from China all the way to here, to Europe, we're actually reducing the differences amongst humans. We're losing, or basically we're stopping natural selection. So gene flow is this idea that because individuals can move, we're reducing the differences between populations. And finally, to wrap up this concept of natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow, it is not possible to produce a perfect organism. Natural selection produces a better than organism, better than what was there in the past. So the issue is why it can't make a perfect organism is one, selection can only act on existing variation. Either you pick this or you pick that. It's kind of like if you've ever been to the eye doctor where they go through the little slides, better or worse. You can't just randomly make something. If you need wings, you can't just randomly sprout wings. It has to be able to pick from what's already out there and pick and choose what's going to help the species survive. Usually adaptations are compromises. There's always a disadvantage to a certain adaptation. We saw that with sickle cell anemia. I mentioned how it can protect individuals from malaria. Well, the compromise of that is that if you have 2 copies of the sickle cell gene, you're going to die before 20. So even though having 1 copy is helpful in these areas, having 2 copies was harmful. So it was a compromise. What is good for the population versus good for the individual. And the last thing that you should have understand about after this entire week is that random chance, natural selection, and the environment all interact to create new organisms and to cause evolution. Your environment derives your evolution, but there's also random events that can also cause evolution to occur.